on.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has announced an immediate 25% tariff on countries doing business with Iran. This aims to pressure Tehran as protests intensify. At least 648 people have been killed in Iran's protests as per US rights group. This comes as security forces crack down on nationwide protests. US President Donald Trump will meet Venezuelan opposition leader and Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado at the White House on 15th January. The talks follow US strikes on Caracas and capture of Nicolas Maduro. French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has launched an appeal in Paris that will decide whether she can run in the 2027 presidential election, after a court imposed an immediate 5-year ban from public office over the misuse of more than €4 million in EU funds. The hearing is due to end in February. Federal arson charges have been filed against a man accused of setting fire to the Temple of Beth Israel synagogue in Mississippi after the FBI said the suspect confessed to torching. The January 10th blaze has caused heavy damage and forced the indefinite closure of the building that was home to Mississippi's first Jewish congregation. EU Ambassador to Jordan Pierre Christophe Chatsi Sawas, with ambassadors of EU member states and Jordan's Minister of Transport Nidal Katamin, has discussed the ways to enhance cooperation between Jordan and the EU in the transport sector, while Jordan has highlighted the importance of the recent Jordan-EU summit. The UK Special Representative for Syria, Ann Snow, and her delegation met with Syria's Minister of Information Hamza al-Mustafa to discuss prospects for cooperation in the media sector, while both sides exchanged views on the impact of past years on Syrian society and the need to expand global cooperation. Pete Hegseth has announced the integration of Elon Musk's Grok AI into US military networks, aiming to boost innovation in defense. The collaboration underscores the importance of rapid technological advancement to maintain America's edge in modern warfare. Now for this hour, we start with US. The Trump administration has issued a strong warning to all US citizens in Iran to leave immediately as protests across the country intensify. The warning comes amid reports of violent crackdowns, road closures, and widespread internet blackouts in Iran. A security alert from the virtual US embassy in Iran urges Americans to leave Iran now and to make plans that do not depend on US government's help. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued special notices due to risks in civil aviation over Iran. US travelers are advised to check FAA restrictions before flying in or near the country. Meanwhile, the administration of United States President Donald Trump continues to threaten Iran with military attacks, saying that airstrikes are one of many options being explored as widespread protests put the Iranian government under growing pressure. Let's in fact listen into what the White House press secretary has shared.
Well, I think one thing President Trump is very good at is always keeping all of his options on the table, and airstrikes would be one of the many, many options that are on the table for the commander-in-chief. Diplomacy is always the first option for the president. He's told all of you last night that what you're hearing publicly from the Iranian regime is quite differently from the messages the administration is receiving privately. And I think the president has an interest in exploring those messages. However, with that said, the president has shown he's unafraid to use military options if and when he deems necessary, and nobody knows that better than Iran.
The Trump administration has issued a strong warning to all U.S. citizens in Iran to leave immediately as protests across the country intensify. The warning comes amid reports of violent crackdowns, road closures, and widespread internet blackouts in Iran. A security alert from the virtual U.S. Embassy in Iran urges Americans to leave Iran now and to make plans that do not depend on U.S. government's help. The Federal Aviation Administration has issued special notices due to risks in civil aviation over Iran. U.S. travelers are advised to check FAA restrictions before flying in or near the country. Meanwhile, the administration of United States President Donald Trump continues to threaten Iran with military attacks, saying that airstrikes are one of many options being explored as widespread protests put the Iranian government under growing pressure. The Trump administration has issued a strong warning to all U.S. citizens to Iran to leave immediately. Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us once again. Good to see you. Now, looking at Iran's situation, we also know that U.S. has announced tariffs of 25% to any country doing trade with Tehran. Why do you think U.S. is suggesting such move right now?
Asuma, what we are seeing is a very significant effort by the United States and also by other international partners to ensure that there is a regime change, meaning there are three things that are happening. One is Trump has issued a statement that he will strike Iran if Iran uses force on the civilians, on the protesters, and that is happening right now. More than 1,000 Iranians have died because of direct fire by the Iranian authorities on the protesters. Second is, of course, the economic conditions have deteriorated very sharply in Iran, and Trump wants to sustain that by sanctioning any countries that are dealing with Iran, and also most recently putting those tariffs, increasing the tariffs of those countries dealing with Iran. So I think that Trump is using both national security measures and other measures to ensure that there is regime change in Iran. And it is very likely that it's a question of time that the Ayatollahs will fall in Iran and there will be a regime with far-reaching leaders in Tehran.
Right. And do you think that, this pressure from outside on countries, from other countries, do you think it is effective in any terms towards this current regime of Iran?
What is happening is that it is an internal protest. So when there's an internal factor that is driving the protest, if there is external support, it can enhance it. And that is what the international community is waiting for, so that with the increase in protest, there will be additional pressure from outside.
Right. But do you think, how do you analyze the effectiveness of this pressure? Even though inside pressure is there, but we have seen in the past, since internal pressure or domestic pressure hasn't been very effective towards this government. Do you think this time it would be different?
It will be different this time because the protests are very large compared to the 3 waves of protests we have seen in the past.
Are you okay, sir?
Yes, I'm sorry, I had a cough.
Don't worry, it's the season, yes. And so since, like in the beginning we saw government being a little more open to talks with the protest leaders, and then they start saying that it's we'll give $7 per, I think, per month or something. And then what happened to those? Are the people still not satisfied with how the government is dealing with them?
I think the Iranian government has very limited options today because the currency has collapsed and there's no way of recovering. Tehran cannot recover and rebuild the economy without international cooperation.
Yes, right. And we know that China and Russia have only called to leave this internal affair of Iran alone, whereas many other countries have voiced their support. What's your analysis on China and Russia, only these two countries in particular, voicing their support for this current regime?
China and Russia is supporting Iran for geopolitical reasons, but their support is limited. Their support cannot sustain. In the face of the pressure that Iran is facing now, from internally and from externally.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that, Professor Rohan Gunaratna. Thank you very much. Now we move on to our next news. A new bill in U.S. introduced by Congressman Randy Fine aims to help President Trump fulfill his controversial promise to seize Greenland. The Greenland Annexation and Statehood Act would give Trump the authority to take whatever steps necessary to acquire the island, currently a semi-autonomous territory of Denmark. Fine argues that control of Greenland is crucial for national security, especially to curb Russian and Chinese influence in the Arctic. The bill comes after the U.S. administration's military actions in Venezuela, highlighting its willingness to use force abroad. However, Greenland's leaders strongly oppose the proposal, stating that their future should not be determined by Greenlandic people, should only be determined by Greenlandic people, not external powers. If passed, the bill would require a full report to Congress outlining the steps to make Greenland a U.S. state. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Asta Chadha. She's Associate Professor of International Relations, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for joining us. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Now, looking at this, do you think that U.S. Congress or U.S. will be moving forward with this move? And how do you think Russia or China is eyeing this kind of move? Do you think they take this provocative move by U.S. and statements seriously?
I mean, absolutely, it's not. I mean, specifically after what happened in Venezuela, I do not think anything that comes out of U.S. administration in terms of their intent is going to be taken very lightly. Which is why we are seeing a lot of responses, not only from Russia and China, who seem to be more vigilant about US actions across the globe, but we are seeing a lot of retaliation from European Union and from the US allies across the region. Now let's understand, why this bill is so important and why we're talking about this. This is based largely on President Trump's administration's idea that Greenland is an absolute necessity for their national security. So by linking the Arctic dominance with national security, by linking the fact that they need US needs to strengthen its northern flank, US needs to control the Arctic shipping lanes, and we know that as a result of the collapsing icebergs, the kind of global warming that the world is witnessing, there are newer and newer routes that are going to open up in the Arctic, and the traditional part there has been Russia. Of course, you have European presence as well, but there is a significant Russian presence. Now, the US looks at this Russia-China nexus within the Arctic and its presence in terms of its ships as a national security threat. And hence they feel that acquiring this island in one way or another, whether by diplomacy or by force, is hence a US national security imperative. Now, with regard to whether China and Russia are looking at it seriously, I mean, anyway, none of these countries, I think, was anyway looking at US very lightly. It's not that US does not have a presence. US is a strategic partner to the NATO. US is a very strategic partner to most of the countries that are engaged in one way or another, whether economically, whether through submarines or through warships. US has been a traditional partner there, and there is significant US presence. If you look at the map and the way US security bases are located, the way US ally security bases are located, it is pretty well covered. I mean, it's not like Russia has a complete free pass, over the Arctic routes, but this has got to do beyond just security. This has to connect with the idea that US considers the critical minerals that are available on Greenland to be very inherent to its security. US feels it needs to lower and lessen the dependence on China for these critical minerals, because we are seeing supply chains being increasingly instrumentalized or in some way securitized or even militarized to some extent. So to alleviate all of these risks, US and this bill is being looked at in a lot of, I think, with a lot of seriousness, not just by US rivals, but also by the US allies.
Right. And moving the focus to US allies, how will US, moving forward, how will US simultaneously balance its close relationship with NATO allies while pursuing this acquiring Greenland dream? Is that even possible?
I mean, see, just going by the international law perspective, I'm not going to comment on whether the US administration currently does want to respect international law, but from a pure international law perspective, under the post 1945 legal framework and the UN Charter, territories cannot be acquired by force or without consent of the people that are living there. And we've heard enough statements coming out of the Danish political sphere, as well as the Greenland Prime Minister, Jens Frederik Nielsen, who's clearly stated, I mean, his words were very strong and self-evident. He said enough is enough. He would not want to tolerate, his government won't tolerate threats. He doesn't want to respect fantasies of world leaders who are trying to assert, their acquisition of Greenland as a possible dream, and he clearly stated that Greenland is not for sale. So we are seeing very strong statements coming out of the parties that are pretty much in control of the entire Greenland, I mean, which extends to Denmark as well. And not only that, European Union has now kind of tried to equate any attempts to seize Greenland by force towards a possible end of the NATO alliance. So there's a lot at stake. We've heard statements from EU leaders. We've heard it earlier from France. We are now hearing it from Italy, stating that they cannot rely anymore on the US to maintain a rule-based international order, and the EU needs to step up its presence, EU needs to step up its defenses, and EU needs to step up on the whole as an international player in the wider Indo-Pacific, and that argument extends even to the Euro-Atlantic security. So we are seeing very strong statements. We are looking at Greenland and its sovereignty in some way being equated with the future of NATO. We are seeing that EU officials are now discussing a common military strategy to support Denmark's sovereignty in case of Greenland particularly, and they're suggesting in some way that any American attack on a NATO ally would be unprecedented crisis, would even lead to weakening or probable end of NATO alliance. So we are hearing very strong statements, and with this process of posing Greenland as a key US security imperative, and to say that even if it's through the bill, the very intent that the US is communicating to its allies is quite dangerous, I would say.
And building on that, now that we know that Denmark alone is incapable of protecting Greenland on its own. So even if NATO allies help pitch in, do you think they are capable of countering US even? And also, yes, like you rightfully highlighted, it will be probably the end of NATO if that does happen. And then where will that throw US off, now that why is Trump so kind of throwing his or US's historical alliances and relationship with Europe? Doesn't Trump see the value in its relationship or maintaining US relationship with Europe?
Right. I mean, let me begin,
Yes,
from your last
sorry.
question
Yeah,
first, and I'll move towards what they're trying to do. So, in
yes,
terms of what is President Trump's, let's say, strategic thought behind this, I mean, it's quite clear he's looking at the entire business of forming alliances, of the very entire, the entire security structure that the US has built over time, over decades, to maintain its hegemony, is somehow getting weakened by this very short term, short sighted, transactional approach of the current administration. Is this new? I wouldn't say it's new. We've heard similar statements even in the first Trump administration. It's just that in the second Trump administration, he seems to be doubling down on this idea of making allies pay for security guarantees that in some way their alliance with the US provides. Is this idea of Denmark, of Greenland, the only idea? I mean, no. I mean, in a way, look at what President Trump has and his administration has been doing for the past 1 year. They've pretty much weakened not just partnerships. Look at what they are doing with India. They are weakening their long-standing alliances. They are weakening US's own position, very hegemonic position in international organizations and international framework. So when President Trump and his administration goes out against the very frameworks that US was instrumental in building in the first place, and I'm talking about UN based organizations, I'm talking about the fact that US is now strategically and structurally pulling out from a lot of these universities, a lot of these NGOs, a lot of this work that US has done over decades to build a reputation of itself as being a leader, not just for the global north but also for the global south, right? It is one of those countries that people would look up to. Given a departure from that, looks like threatening allies is also now on table, something that was unimagined, something that one wouldn't think
yes,
of. The very fact that this idea of, now coming to the Greenland question and coming to the capabilities of EU as a whole, currently it is very difficult to say if EU can so quickly build up enough capabilities in order to, what they are looking at as an enemy statement, or a very, very dysfunctional statement, sort of trying to weaken NATO. It is difficult to say that they would be able to build those capabilities in the short run, but it is also significant to see that the entire European Union stands behind Denmark on this. Which is not to say that they are alone in this fight. We are hearing statements coming out of Denmark where they are pleading countries in the global south like India also to come on board and talk about Danish sovereignty or of Greenland sovereignty. So they are no longer, I mean, European security now is no longer just a European business. They're extending it forward. They will go and enter into partnerships with other, strategic rivals if need be. If they feel they have wider security network prevailing, if they enter into alignments with countries like India, they will do so. They are more likely to acquire weapons and more likely to enter into defense agreements with a lot of other countries that were not traditionally their suppliers in any form. So we are
yes.
seeing a widening of scope of more partnerships that go beyond this traditional NATO setup. And this, I would say, if this were to become a reality, if EU were to kind of back Denmark on this by building on their security capabilities, by building on defense capabilities, they don't have anyone else. I mean, in the entire world has no one else to blame but the US for bringing about the situation in the first place.
Yeah, thank you for laying it out all there, Dr. Chadha. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, moving on to US again, the United States is cracking down hard on immigration under President Donald Trump, with the State Department announcing that over 100,000 visas have been revoked since he took office last year. Officials say this marks a record high for visa cancellations and comes as part of a broader effort to deport individuals deemed a threat to public safety. The crackdown includes 8,000 student visas and 2,500 specialized visas, which many of them were held by individuals with criminal histories. Deputy spokesperson Tommy Pigott has said that the numbers represent a 150% increase over 2024. Most revocations are linked to visa overstays, DUIs, assault, and theft. To strengthen enforcement, the administration has expanded screening procedures, including social media checks and stricter vetting for visa applicants. Authorities have vowed to continue these deportations, emphasizing that the move is aimed at keeping America safe and maintaining the integrity of the country's immigration system. Now, for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Asta Chadha. She's Associate Professor of International Relations of Ritsumeikan University, joins us live from Kyoto. Thank you very much, Dr. Chadha, for staying with us. Now, looking at this, what more can you tell us about this, ongoing crackdown or upgrades of stricter enforcement of towards visa of U.S. by U.S.?
Right. I mean, see, the State Department currently is stating that, 100,000 plus visa revocations are as a result of their national security procedures, are for reinforcing public safety, are for reinforcing that America's safety first dominates over any other ideas of immigration or any other ideas that people might have in terms of creating a very inclusive society, right? So they're putting security, they're securitizing the very aspect of multiculturalism, or in some ways, to say that the free and open movement of people across borders is being severely restricted as a result of their very narrow sort of security vision. Now, had it been entirely based on the fact that they have sufficient evidence to support that certain individuals were part of criminal gangs, or they had a very violent historical past that ran contrary to the law enforcement in some way, probably it wouldn't be so contested. But the problem here is that very few cases seem to be directly linked to any such encounters with the law enforcement in the United States, right? We are talking about not just convictions, arrests, charges, but we are also looking at other things that don't entirely fall into a direct national security threat, like social media activity, for instance. Right? I mean, the online presence, the fact that the US administration is finding something as a threat or objectionable. So even social media monitoring and surveillance now can be part of these visa revocations. Visa overstays, or things, that usually result in people getting deported, are now resulting in US being very strict about who enters the country. I mean, revocation is in itself is a very extreme measure that is taken usually in extreme circumstances, but the fact that the number of visa revocations has more than doubled compared to 2024 shows that this administration is very, very strict, is very, very single-mindedly bent upon making sure that its idea of national security then plays into wider arena, not just in terms of criminal intent, but also goes into things like, a person's social media history, a person's overall history, could be their encounters in terms of violations of laws that don't necessarily have to be very, very serious violations, but any sort of public charge, that the person ran into. Factors like, we are also hearing about factors like English proficiency. We're talking about financial resources or insufficient financial resources as reasons. Now, this is not saying that a state does not have the right to decide for itself, but the fact that these seem to have been undertaken not in full consensus of everybody in power. This seems to be also extending to the idea that Trump administration very proudly calls on expanding a travel ban that it has imposed since this year in 2026. And if you look at the list of countries, really, are those the countries that are sending the maximum number of immigrants to the United States, or does that list comprehensively exclude countries that have had a history? I mean, it doesn't look like it.
Yes.
There are countries that have had those kind of historical affiliations with very questionable organizations, some banned organizations, but they don't feature on the list, right? So this visa cancellation or revocation seems to be partly a result of their idea of security, but also partly a result of how strategically US looks at what countries, how it is convenient for them in terms of this total ban. And clearly looks like, H-1B visa revocations are also part of this. So do they really equate worker visas together with problems with law enforcement? These are the questions that the administration hasn't yet answered.
Yes, 100%. We will be eyeing that. Always great learning from you, Dr. Asta Chadha. Thank you for joining us once again. Now we move on to our next news. Strong backlash has erupted in Washington over a criminal probe targeting Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell. However, all living former U.S. central bank chiefs have jointly condemned the Justice Department's action, calling it an unprecedented attempt to undermine the Fed's independence. Grand jury subpoenas were served over Powell's congressional testimony last year about Federal Reserve building renovations. Meanwhile, former leaders warned that prosecutorial pressure could threaten economic stability, inflation control, and public confidence. The statement was signed by former Fed chairs Alan Greenspan, Ben Bernanke, and Janet Yellen, along with former Treasury Secretaries Henry Paulson and Timothy Geithner. Some Republican lawmakers have also criticized the probe, saying such actions have no place in the United States. Now we move on to our next news. Apple announces to use Google's Gemini AI models in its new version of Siri coming later this year. This is a part of a multi-year deal between Apple and Google. Google has been working very hard to catch up with OpenAI by improving its most advanced AI models, including tools for making images and videos. This new agreement adds to the long partnership where Google is already the default search engine on iPhones and other Apple devices is a deal that sends lots of traffic to Google and earns Apple tens of billions of dollars each year. Google also stated that Apple Intelligence will still run on Apple devices and Apple's own private cloud systems, and that Apple will continue to keep its strong privacy protections in place. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News6 World for more news updates from around the world.